Someone might wander through Coventry accidentally listening to Bad Voltage, and then it may be known. But at that point, it's just going to be a bunch of people, trying to fight a doorknob. So I'm not worried about it. So.
Shots fired.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Bad Voltage Season 3, Episode 2. I hope you're all doing very well. I hope you're all nice and safe and sound, locked up in your houses as part of the old COVID-19 that's sweeping the planet. So, how are you guys doing? Are you enjoying the lockdown?
Enjoying would be a stretch. Acts like I don't think there's anything different about this at all. Is there a quarantine?
It literally isn't.
It isn't.
I mean, everyone's like, well, this is very terrible. I was kind of think, well, yeah, okay, but my life hasn't changed very much. I mean, I can't go to the pub anymore. But the virtual pub has become a thing in my life. So that's quite good.
Does that mean you have alcohol in the flat now?
It does, but I'm only allowed to drink it when I'm on video calls with other people.
I think he's got very specific rules about booze.
That is a quite
people might not realise.
The rules still apply. Because, otherwise, seriously, I'd just go, I fancy a beer. And I'd do all my current life except I'd drink another 30 pints a week. It's not good for me.
Yeah, I've not had such discipline. We had a Zoom call with some friends on Saturday night, and a friend of ours was teaching us how to mix drinks. It was quite cool. You can do all kinds of stuff over video conferences, it turns out.
I know.
So...
Virtual pub, it's great.
Yeah, exactly.
We had like 10 or 11 of us or something the other day.
Yep, I think it's the way forward. We're all looking forward to getting back to it, but it's, anyway. And now, this.
So in Rishikesh in India, there were a bunch of tourists from various places, the USA, Mexico, Australia, Israel, and they apparently ignored the lockdown requirements, which say don't go out unless you've got an important reason to go out. And,
bad people. And
when they were caught, their punishment was they had to write, I did not follow the lockdown, I am sorry, 500 times on bits of paper.
They had to do lines?
Yeah.
Bart Simpson come alive. It's hilarious.
I think it's a brilliant punishment. I'd love to see loads more stuff do this.
My mum and dad, before I was born, if my brothers got into trouble, they used to make them copy the phone book.
Really?
Okay.
That is a brutal punishment. you go and copy 3 pages, and this is not the yellow pages with the big ad. This is like the original phone books listing everybody's number. Yeah.
Well, this goes to show you...
That's why they like doxing people.
Yeah, this goes to show you a couple of things, actually. First of all, how old Jono is, because all of our under-20s audience are listening to this going, what's a phone book? And secondly, this explains why Simon has minute knowledge of everything in the country whose name begins in I. Anyway, next news item. The Rakuten Monkeys, who are a Taiwanese team in the Chinese Professional Baseball League, they're still doing games.
Okay.
Yeah. They're still doing games. But as you can imagine, there's no audience. And so they didn't want to perform in front of an empty stand. So they're going to have dressed up robot mannequins in the stands watching them instead.
This is ridiculous.
I honestly can't decide whether I think this is amusing or the creepiest thing I've ever heard.
Why are they robot mannequins? Why can't they just... I guess if it's just a bunch of lifeless mannequins, that's creepy. Is it creepier?
Is it more creepy or less creepy?
What's normal?
I can't decide.
Playing baseball literally in the uncanny valley. It's really worrying.
It's just going to look like the background in FIFA 95 on the Mega Drive, isn't it? Where you have like this sprite just moving backwards and forwards.
Loads of individually cloned faces, just over and over and over and over again. This is, as far as I can tell, this is in preparation for the robot uprising when the robots all come after us, and so they're used to baseball, so we show them cricket and they all just fall asleep instead.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds stupid.
Well, from from the stupid to the stupider, I think. Here in the UK, there has been a rash of people burning down 5G telephone masts because apparently 5G causes coronavirus.
This is in England?
Yeah.
This is in the UK, more broadly. This sounds uniquely American. Why is it happening?
I was genuinely surprised. I thought to myself, well, okay, yeah, this is happening. It happened in Birmingham, for goodness sake. I couldn't believe it. And Liverpool and a couple of other places. And I thought, surely we've picked up this particular strain of idiocy from America. And as far as I can tell, we haven't. So, well done.
It's one of those articles where you read and you think, this must be The Onion. And you're like, no, Financial Times. That's weird.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
The best thing about it is the 5G rollout here in the UK has been really slow. So most of the masts that are getting burned down don't actually have 5G yet. They're just 3G and 4G masts.
I mean, it's been really slow here as well, so yeah.
And it's across the UK. That's amazing. I could understand if it was in Coventry, because Coventry is, let it be known, a total shithole where that kind of stuff would happen, okay?
Harsh and controversial to people from Coventry.
Fortunately, no one from Coventry knows what podcast it is, so they're not listening. So it's someone might wander through Coventry accidentally listening to Bad Voltage, and then it may be known. But at that point, it's just going to be a bunch of people, trying to fight a doorknob. So I'm not worried about it. So.
Shots fired.
So watch out if you're thinking of getting 5G, that people will think you're giving them the coronavirus.
That's stupid. You promised correctly it was stupider than the last one.
Well, and then the last one, I can't decide whether this is stupid or not. I honestly thought it was a joke, and I don't think it is. At Stanford, they've now invented a toilet that identifies you based on your anal print.
Now, hang on.
Now, as far as I tell, now I have to be clear here, right? And this is admitting my lack of journalistic integrity on this particular point. I read about this. There was a paper published in Nature, for goodness sake, right? But I have not read the paper because I have the feeling that if I read the paper, there'll be some actual good reason for it, and then they'll stop it being funny. So I haven't.
There's probably a real reason, and there's probably a significant amount of genuine engineering work that went into this, which would make it so much less funny. Right now, it's just. I just want the headline and nothing else.
As far as I can tell,
your arsehole has got a biometric profile.
When I say the word anal print, and we don't want to be 9-year-old boys giggling about this sort of thing, but when I say that word, what you're imagining is precisely what this thing is.
Yes,
right?
Exactly what you're thinking. It's that thing.
It's an anal fingerprint.
Yeah, except I don't think I'd necessarily phrase it that way, but yes.
I think we have a name for the show.
We do not.
Well, welcome.
What is the purpose of this research? Like, how could that be useful? It's not like you need to, arse unlock your toilet before you use it, right?
Maybe you do. Maybe they're going to do a sort of
not with your ghetto old toilet seat.
Yeah, Grandad, get with the program. This is part of the Internet of Shit.
You know what? Yeah, you know what? Interestingly, though, I saw Mark Cerny, who is the architect of the many PlayStations, but the PlayStation 5. They've got this new 3D Tempest technology for audio, and what you do is they want to take your unique hearing profile. And if you were able to put that into the PS5, it will tune all of the audio to your exact way in which you listen to music and audio. And it's a completely different experience. So maybe these different ways of taking your unique physical profile, I see that, but not with your ass. So anyway, let's get on to some more serious stuff, because this is stupid. And you should know better, Mr. Langridge.
Very well. Okay. So go ahead.
So it turns out that so you discovered this act, but the US says they're not going to be party to the Moon Agreement from 1979, which declares that no country owns space. What's going on here?
Well, what I thought was interesting about this is the White House have very recently put out a statement saying that I'm going to quote it now. It's talking about an executive order. The executive order also affirms Congress's intent that Americans should have the right to engage in commercial exploration, recovery, and use of resources in outer space, consistent with applicable law. And I thought, but that's okay, because the applicable law says no one country owns space, right?
Right.
Which means that because everyone sat around and went, okay, how about we don't have some massive economic war over space resources, and we declare that everything beyond the Earth is owned by humanity in common or whatever, which is all fine, and that is indeed the law. It was declared in the Moon Treaty of 1979. The problem is that the US never signed it. And
didn't sign it in 79.
Yep. And so now it is the White House's position that outer space is a legally and physically unique domain of human activity, and the United States does not view space as a global commons. So apparently the view now is that space is finders keepers to whoever gets there first, which means I can't see any way this could possibly end badly.
So America didn't sign it in 1979, and did someone just discover the paperwork wasn't signed recently? Like, what happened? I'm assuming back in the 70s there was a controversy, or early 80s there was a controversy about America not signing.
I imagine so, having looked into it, yes.
Right.
But as far as I can tell, everyone just kind of went along with it anyway, right? Didn't actually officially sign the thing, but was still...
It's not particularly pressing matter, given the fact that not many countries are going to space, right?
No,
around that time, especially,
and not between then and now. But it's this feels like the first line in a book about how war went to space, right? 100 years from now, someone writes the book about how the space wars began. The first line will be, in 2020, the US affirmed their right to own things in space. And then the rest of the book happens.
Yeah, but if you think about it, the notion of no one from Earth owns space it's a bit idealistic, isn't it? Like, because at some point, it might be 200 years from now, there is going to be a nation that is going to challenge that and is going to say, well, hang on a second, why can't we have this bit of the moon and this bit of Jupiter, or, going back to the anal print, this part of Uranus? I could not let that one go, by the way.
But you say that in such a way that implies that ideals are a bad thing to have.
No. I'm not
idealistic.
saying.
Let's have ideals. They're quite good.
No. I didn't say that ideals are a bad thing. Of course, ideals are a good thing. I'm just saying that human beings get in the way and screw it up.
But
he's just looking forward to Jupiter, brought to you by Wolverhampton.
Can we just agree that no one owns Coventry?
To be clear, speaking as a bloke who lives like 25 miles from Coventry as opposed to 5,025 miles from Coventry, I don't understand why we're banging on it quite this hard in this particular episode.
I've literally been to Coventry once. And
sounds like you had a great time.
It wasn't good. Yeah, it was basically a disused polytechnic. Was the entire town? It was not good.
Should we talk about something? That was my bridge in between the slightly less serious news and the slightly more serious.
All right, give us some sugar. What's next?
So I don't know if both of you saw, and this is just kind of happening as we're recording. They just released the information Friday, and more details are kind of coming out early this week. But Apple and Google partnered on a COVID-19 contact tracing technology. And we kind of talked about this last week with what some other countries were doing. What's interesting about this is Apple and Google do not partner on a lot of things, especially not at this level. And B, as opposed to the countries we discussed last show where it was an app, this would actually be built into the OS. And if it's built into iOS and Android, it's basically built into almost every phone that's sold, with very few exceptions.
Yeah.
Right. So kind of a difference maker there. It still will be opt-in. They're trying to, from what I can tell, make it as privacy focused as possible, but given what it would have access to and who is involved, obviously some people are a little bit concerned. It is going to use Bluetooth Low Energy, so basically your keys would roll some indeterminate amount of very short time. The keys would only be stored on your device. Every time you came into contact with someone, it would store that. And then if you tested positive, you could upload and it would contact the people that you had come in contact with.
Yeah, so
that's the interesting.
The concept that it's based on, the protocol that it's based on, is called DP3T.
Yes.
And it's quite a sensible thing. Nicky Case did a really good little comic explainer about it, which I'll link to in the show notes if I remember. But basically, you broadcast a load of essentially random words, like random UUIDs probably or something. And then your phone also remembers all the random ones it heard. So as Jeremy says, if you then get diagnosed with coronavirus, you upload your list of random words that you heard, and they can then contact the devices that output those random words without necessarily compromising anyone's privacy, which is a really good idea, assuming that Apple and Google follow the protocol. And they've sort of said they're going to and sort of not, but people are a bit dodgy about it. And to add insult to injury on this, there was a report this week in The Guardian about discussions inside the UK government saying we could do with a COVID tracing app like this. And a bunch of ministers said, yeah, but if we do that, then, and we do it that way, then it's all anonymous. Is there some way we can change the protocol around a bit so it's not anonymous, so we can find out who the people are if we need to? And this is exactly why people don't trust this kind of thing. And I'll tell you what else. If it's built into iOS and it's built into Android, it's never going away again. They're not going to just turn it off and take it out again after COVID's stopped.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, it will be applicable to other major health issues, and there's going to be another pandemic at some point. It might be in 50 years, but there will be another one.
Yeah, but think about...
We don't know when it's going to be, of course.
Yeah, but you can absolutely imagine some advertising organisations saying, well, it'd be really handy if we could have access to that database, just to know all the people that this person contacted just after they walked out of our shop. So if you can marry that up with the location data, and if it's
I don't think you can do that.
If it's in there, someone's going to think of this.
They will. But I mean, let's be honest. Apple. I think we've all been impressed with Apple's attitudes towards privacy. Tim Cook seems to be especially protective of privacy for the many examples that we've seen recently. Google, that's a separate question. But I don't think I think those companies know you cannot screw around with this kind of thing. Like if you open the doors for something as important as COVID-19 and you were to turn that into a commercial operation, that is the height of poor taste and poor judgment.
I certainly hope so. We'll maybe revisit this in 2 years and see what the situation is.
Yep.
And a final related news item. Someone did a study looking at Facebook friendship groups and Facebook travel information and so on. And it turns out that you can measure the connectedness of different geographic areas. So you can tell whether a person A is friends with someone in location B or has travelled recently to location B and so on. And with that, because you can measure the connectedness of geographic areas, you can then use that to attempt to model how COVID-19 will spread by looking at areas where there's a lot of it, say, places in Italy and what have you. And then you look at areas which are, according to their algorithm, connected with that area. Look at other areas connected with that area and say, do they have a higher incidence of coronavirus than you'd expect? And the answer is yes. So it actually
that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, that's interesting. There's actually a thing going on right now where there's a suspicion that coronavirus here in the Bay Area actually impacted the Bay Area back in late 2019, early 2020, because a lot of people, myself included, got a terrible flu. And there's a pretty high amount of transport backwards and forwards between San Francisco and Shenzhen in China, especially because of the tech world.
I read something. I'm not specifically going to stand against that. I did read something which said that people are pretty sure it's not the case, and the first confirmed case was in January. But I literally just read it in passing, and I've not looked into it at all. So it might be right.
January would be early 2020.
Yeah. I think I think it's Stanford are doing now. The antibody testing kits are coming about. Yep. I want to get myself tested. I think I may have had it.
Did you lose your taste or anything?
Sick. I didn't lose my taste.
Okay.
The two things that go against the theory that it's corona is that I didn't have shortness of breath, and I didn't lose my taste and smell.
But it does seem to impact some people slightly differently.
Actually, I probably did, thinking about it, but maybe I didn't think of it, because whenever you get a bad cold, you tend to lose your taste. You can't taste anything. Yeah, but who knows? But it was a far worse than normal flu around the Bay Area for sure.
I don't know. I mean, when I first read this thing, I thought that it meant that you could actually catch coronavirus over Facebook by being friends with people who had it. But that is fortunately not the case.
And if you're on your 5G phone in the UK using Facebook,
that's it.
It's a terminal case.
You're immediately dead at that point.
I did not realize that there was dataforgood.facebook.com.
404.
An interesting story arose recently in which the Internet Archive, which many of you will be familiar with as archiving the internet. Check it out. Wisdom right there.
Observation there. Yeah, that was great. And that's our show, folks. Thanks.
They have purchased a whole bunch of physical books, and then they've been scanning them and lending them out, these ebooks of these scans,
yes,
one-on-one, and it's called controlled digital lending. And this has infuriated a number of different authors, and it's infuriated some authors guilds who are claiming that this is already illegal. The Internet Archive says that it isn't, and this is all begging a big question here around where do you draw the line between access to stuff and copyright and ownership. And I think the three of us have always traditionally been in favor of, we want information access for everybody. It's the great equalizer. But then you do have people who, two of us have written books and put them out there. Jeremy has worked on other things that have got copyright attached to them. Mm-hmm. We've all created things. Where do you draw the line between access and copyright?
That is a great question. So I do want to, I think, add a little bit of context to exactly what they're doing. So since they've been doing this since 2018, and their position, and they articulated this in a white paper that was co-authored by someone at Duke and someone at Harvard, that's been that by scanning them once and putting them online a singular time, which is what you referred to as the controlled digital lending, that was protected by first sale doctrine under fair use. So whether you refute that or not.
That was protected by what?
First sale doctrine.
What is that?
So the first sale doctrine is the concept that if you buy something that's copyrighted legitimately, you have the right to sell that thing once and only once. And once you sell it, it's not yours anymore, but the original copy is yours to sell once further.
Yeah,
so it's basically it's the legal element around the sale itself. Right?
Yes, right. The first sale doctrine originally got invented. This is years ago, before digital technology was even a thing.
Yes,
where there was kind of the idea that if you bought a record or a book or something like that, and then you wanted to sell it, the publishers went, "But we don't get any money out of that second-hand book, and we want you to pay us."
Yes.
And the government at the time in the US went, "Nah, get stuffed. You got paid for it one time. People are allowed to sell bananas for the same thing." And so they codified it into law, and it's called the first sale doctrine.
Yes. So this is already legally on somewhat shaky ground because you have, in fact, copied it. And the Authors Guild, for example, disagrees. Whether you agree or disagree, they've been doing this since 2018. What's happened here is they've created the Emergency Library Initiative. And so before, like I said, if they had 5 copies physically, they would lend out 5 copies at once. And when the 5th person checked it back in, the next person on the waiting list would get that copy. What they've basically done now is completely remove the waiting list. So they're lending out an unlimited amount of that copy, even if they only own one physical copy. Which is, so they're in effect, they're
basically digital piracy.
In effect, they're making a carte blanche fair use claim through the duration of quarantine.
Yes. So there are a couple of different sizes. I mean, I think if you take the two opposing ends of it, the Internet Archive on one end says, what they were doing with the controlled digital lending concept, the 1-for-1, we've got one physical copy, we lend out one ebook copy at a time. They say that's perfectly legitimate. Publishing houses say they don't. I tend to fall on the Internet Archive side of this. The reason the publishing houses don't like it is because what they want you to do is buy the ebook version. What the Internet Archive are doing, basically unlike everybody else, is instead of buying the ebook version and then lending the ebook version to people, they are buying a physical copy, scanning it themselves, so they make their own ebook and then lend that out as an ebook. Now, the publishers don't want you to do that. The IA say this is in keeping with our mission to some extent, step beyond the bounds of copyright law in order to archive things for future generations, and I think they have a point in that. No, I personally don't have a massive problem with them doing that as long as they stick to the 1-for-1 thing.
Yes.
The bigger objection, the reason this has come up recently is because, as Jeremy says, they've now gone, we're going to scan one copy and then lend it out to anyone who wants it for as long as they want, or for 2 weeks, but they can just renew it if they want to, whatever. At which point, the authors got paid for one physical copy of the book and that's it, and then a zillion people get to read it. And it's not, there's no scarcity here at all. One of the things that interested me about when I researched this is I assumed you had the PLR and you don't. The public lending right is in the UK and in most Western countries, but not the US, where when a book is lent from a library, the library pays a small amount of money to the author. It's capped at about £6,600 a year. So no one's getting rich off of this. But if you spent a lifetime writing books, and most of them are out of print now, but they're still in libraries, and you get a little trickle of income coming, there's quite a lot of mid-list authors for whom this is a substantial proportion of their income.
Yep.
I bet a lot of people who have written books and they're getting royalty checks don't make that much money a year.
Yeah, exactly.
From actual royalty checks.
Right. Yeah. This is not from public lending rights stuff. This is people actually writing books which are on the shelves in Borders or whatever. Does Borders still exist, or did they go bust?
Don't know.
But yeah, anyway.
Don't know.
The point of the US, you don't have a public lending right. Putting your books in the library as an author or as a publisher, as far as I can tell, is an act of charity in the US. You've decided, I'm going to let people read my book for free. I get no income from them.
Well, so libraries here license their ebooks directly from the publisher, but there is they worked out a different business model.
I'm talking about physical books, not ebooks. The reason this
authors have no input in the libraries. The libraries just get them. You don't volunteer the books to the libraries.
The reason I think this is... Well, no. The publishers have decided to go... we'll sell you one copy and then you can lend it out to as many people as you like, as often as you like, without paying us a penny, which is different to how it is most places other than the US, where a small amount of money makes it back. This is that £6,600.
There's a whole business model around the number of times you can lend it out, and you have to give a certain amount towards maintenance, and there's a whole business model around it.
So there's a whole bunch of stuff. The ebooks are different, but the Internet Archives thing seems to be sort of bit of an end run around the law, because they're buying a physical book and then making an ebook out of it and then going, well, now we happen to have an ebook, we'll lend it out like it's an ebook, which means we can lend it to as many people as we want, etc., etc., etc. Because they didn't have to buy the DRM'd books from the publisher, which restrict how many times they can be lent out and how often they can be lent out for. The IA can then just say, yeah, we're going to lend it out to as many people as we want with the open library thing. So
I have a problem with this. And the problem is that look, again, the three of us, I think we're absolutely all in favor of people getting access to information, right? And getting access to content. It's one of the most beautiful things about the internet in general.
Yes.
Is it's democratized knowledge to a significant extent. You can learn almost anything by going to the internet. And people are very generous with what they do. But the issue I have with this is you completely bypassing the author and the publisher's rights on this. So, for example, when I wrote The Art of Community, I had a very intentional conversation with O'Reilly about making sure that the book was available under a Creative Commons license. It was important to me. Unfortunately, O'Reilly did a ton of books that way. and it was important to them too.
Yep.
So by definition, we made a joint decision to make the Art of Community available to everybody. And that's great. And lots of people have downloaded it for free who couldn't afford to go and buy the book. But this is completely bypassing that. And they're just deciding that they can make this content available. And while that serves a broader public good, I just think ethically this is so shady.
But to your point, that was a decision that you, the author, made about your copyright specifically.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you did it in conjunction with your publisher. When DHW Utopia was the first book I wrote, they stopped printing it, but they said people will still buy the PDF copy. I said, well, at this point, there aren't that many people buy it. Why don't we make it Creative Commons? And we went backwards and forwards on this for 3 or 4 months or whatever. And eventually they said, we're just not geared up to do that. We're not prepared to do that, whatever. And I said, well, okay, this has got to be a joint decision. I'd like to do it, but you're the publisher and you bought the rights off me. That's what royalty payments are. So, if you don't want to do it, we don't get to. But if you and O'Reilly made that joint decision, so it gets to happen. But like you say, the thing I don't like about this is it feels shady by the Internet Archive. But
it does.
But worse, it doesn't just feel shady, it feels disingenuous. Because they make these claims and then when they've had a bunch of public pushback on this and they retreat behind but it's coronavirus, so it's a think of the children argument, right? We're doing it because it's the crisis, so don't have a go at us. We're just trying to
that's
help.
all bollocks.
Do you hate people who can't afford to buy books? And it's really disingenuous, and it disappoints me about the IA because up until now I think they've been an unalloyed good for the internet.
Yep.
And
enormous. Yeah.
And it does seem to have taken the shine off their star a little bit, in my opinion.
Well, what worries me a little bit about this as well is that, when we had our prep show for this, and we were talking about this, whether we're going to discuss this topic, one of the things that I somewhat flippantly said was that anyone who is depending on revenue from selling books, that's a bad financial decision in your life, because people, unless you're Stephen King, people generally don't make a lot of money from books. However, I've changed my viewpoint on this a little bit, and that is I would apply that view to people who sell books through a traditional publisher. But what's becoming increasingly common is people building massive audiences primarily from providing and producing free content that goes out on the internet, such as free videos and whatever else. People sign up for it with their email address, and then eventually they'll buy smaller bits of content from them, such as ebooks. I saw a webinar from a guy the other day who sold nearly $1 million worth of ebooks, very specific niche marketing stuff. And, his audience are super happy and all the rest of it. And so at this point, when they do this, they're really potentially digging into people's actual businesses, and let alone the publishers, who that is their business.
I mean, there are obviously a whole bunch of problems with the way copyright is currently constituted and the very heavy hand that large media organisations have in this kind of thing. And that's a problem. But if you have a problem with that, go and complain at Disney, not some mid-list sci-fi author who's just about surviving on royalty checks. To enlarge on your example just then, imagine a mid-list YouTube creator who puts out videos for free and then does other ones on Patreon, right? So on Patreon, you get the behind-the-scenes stuff. Quite a few people seem to do this. They do public stuff for free on YouTube or on Twitch, and then there are a whole bunch of bonus stuff for Patreons about they do behind the scenes and how I made this and exclusive early access to stuff and things like that. And that's a business model for a bunch of people. Now imagine the Internet Archive signed up for that Patreon, took those videos, put them in the Internet Archive. And then when they were accused about it, said, but we're providing access to people because of the coronavirus who couldn't otherwise afford it. There'd be outrage. And as far as I can tell, that's precisely the thing that they're doing here.
It is, yeah. It's so disappointing, and I mean, it's not exactly the same. But, like all these idiots who were hoarding hand sanitizer so they could sell it at a premium. Or if you go and try and buy anything to do with webcams or video equipment, everything is twice the price or three times the price now.
I was talking to my parents, right? Because I told them about the virtual pub, and they said, "Well, that's quite a good idea. We could do that." And so they said, well, what do we need to do? And I said, well, just sit in front of the computer. And then I remembered they have a desktop machine, not a laptop, don't have a webcam.
Right.
So I said, just go and buy the Logitech C220 or C230 or whatever it is, the basic level one, which is brilliant, right? I really like the Logitech stuff. And there are none for sale anywhere unless you want to pay 150 quid for a £40 webcam.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. And this thing with the Internet Archive, it sounds harsh, but they're capitalizing on something in the wrong way.
Right. And I think
they'll be able to justify it.
At least from my perspective, we're all sympathetic to what they want to do. And I think even the three of us think the controlled digital lending, while it probably isn't legal given the current laws, we don't like the current laws around copyright enough to think we can justify to ourselves that like it's a good thing. It's a pro. That's a good way. The law should trend in that direction anyway, so it's reasonable. Where this just seems like A, straight up piracy, but B, the thing that worries me about this is while authors were unlikely to sue under controlled digital lending because it's reasonable-ish, this seems wholly unreasonable in a way that is going to open them to litigation and undo a lot of the goodwill that they built up and put the rest of the things they do at real risk. Right. That's my concern.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is what's disappointing here is I think that if they went to a lot of publishers and a lot of authors and said, we'd like to do something specific, they'd be open to it. Like, put it this way, putting my publisher to one side, like I released People Powered in November, right? If someone came up to me and said, we'd like to do this lending library thing, and we'd like to make 500 copies of People Powered available so people can, borrow it and then lend it back, I would have absolutely no problem with doing that as part of this pandemic.
Sure. You can even put some press
people are interested
around it.
in building. Right. And I can't speak for HarperCollins, but I suspect they will probably be fine to a degree as well. But the fact that they make this fucking decision for you at the Internet Archive
and unlimited copies.
The thing that's galling.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing that's particularly galling. So we've seen this before, haven't we? We've seen spats around this, But where do you, what about Spotify? What about Open Access, which is becoming increasingly...
I don't think this is Spotify. I think it might be Napster. But
yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is Metallica. Do you remember the whole Metallica? For people who are not old like we are,
yeah. For people who are thinking, what was Napster? Oh, that was a thing in 2002 when I was 4 years old.
Yeah. Napster was, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, Napster was basically a service where people could find loads of music. It was like Spotify, but where you could download it and steal it from the artist.
I don't know that it was like Spotify.
It was like Spotify in that it had all the music, but the point was they hadn't bought it first.
So it's kind of like the Internet Archive.
It's which is why I said it's much more like, I mean, you can have a bunch of problems with Spotify's business model and how artists get screwed by it, but they're getting screwed because their contract says you get screwed. It's not just someone's robbed their thing and is selling it.
Right. Well, what's interesting is that back then, so Napster became this place where if you were vaguely technically literate and you were on the internet back in the earlier days of the internet, you got Napster, you could search for something such as Metallica, download their entire music catalog, and people would share it with each other. Metallica specifically took a particularly dim view in this. And when I say Metallica, I'm talking about Lars Ulrich.
You mean very specifically Lars from Metallica, yes.
Right, who is for those of you who don't know Metallica, is the drummer from Metallica, who is a quite nauseating person. And not a particularly good drummer at that as well. But they're a great band.
Wow, stick the boot in, I would. Also,
yeah, he should move to Coventry.
It all comes together nicely.
But he's, to Lars's credit, he was quite frustrated with this when Napster came out. And I can understand from the perspective of a musician saying, hang on a second, we make these records, they get distributed via our record company and distributors, you buy them in stores, and people are just going ripping that off and putting it on the internet. And he got quite upset about this. And back then we were all a lot younger, and we were like, whoa, he's just, this rich rock star. This is ridiculous. But I actually can see his perspective back then. I can see why he was upset about it. The world went after him. Like, this did not go well for Metallica. And he has subsequently changed his views and has said, that was a terrible mistake. I realized at the time I was just kind of like this technically illiterate buffoon who didn't necessarily see what was happening. And I think he's kind of unnecessarily apologizing for what happened. But I think that was a good example of a change in technology that changed the completely normal culture of what happened, right? So Metallica could see this is terrible, but the world has gone towards Spotify. The world has gone towards Amazon Music and whatever else. Are we seeing this with publishing?
Well, you see,
I don't know if we are.
I think this is a question of sympathetic plaintiffs to some extent. Because when there were people going after Napster, the people doing it precisely were millionaire rock stars, right? If they'd have put forward a bunch of mid-listers if the RIAA had set behind a bunch, Chris Isaac or something, who's like, I'm surviving on the income from my records, but I'm not playing Madison Square Garden. I'm not a huge deal. I can't afford to give these sales up. It pays my mortgage. Maybe people would have been more sympathetic, but it's honestly quite difficult to look at some bloke from his enormous mansion in Beverly Hills going, you should give me more money for the records. Yeah. When you're like, okay, but I've got 4 pence pocket money a month, right? What am I going to do? Save up for a year to buy Death Magnetic. So,
well, I don't think he was saying you should give me more.
I don't think. I think the point is that with the publishing thing, what we've seen with the Internet Archive is that most of the people speaking up are not Stephen King, who has been quite honest about the fact that, I don't like the fact that this is happening, but it's not my place to speak up for it, because honestly, if no one ever bought any of my books ever again and I had to give half the money back, I'd still have more money than all of you put together. It precisely is people who are making a living at writing, but not necessarily a massively good living.
Yep.
Well, and the problem is it's people where their primary living is writing, right? So a lot of business books, for example, are basically lead magnets for people to go and get that person's consulting services or buy their training courses or whatever, right?
But if you're... Are they, Jono? Is that what... Is people
so I hear.
Goodness, where would people go for such consulting services, Jono? But
if for example you are, let's say for example you put out an obscure sci-fi book called Bad Voltage.
if you're Jonathan Littell, in fact.
But that's a real problem. Like if that's what you do. What's interesting about going back to the music thing, just as a kind of a corollary a little bit here, when we did Severed Fifth and all the music was supposed to be out under the Creative Commons license, that was the whole point of Severed Fifth. I got to know a whole bunch of small to medium metal bands in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah.
Who, bands like Forbidden and Exodus is on the larger side, where a lot of these bands, not specifically those two, but a lot of musicians were very uncomfortable about the idea of Creative Commons, because for them, it was their income. They were like, well, what if you put music on the internet and people don't go and pay for it? I'm literally living paycheck to paycheck just to do this. And most of these people have day jobs as it is. So even though Lars Ulrich made all the noise about Napster, I think there was a lot of people who weren't shouting as much because they saw how he was getting treated, who didn't like the idea of it. For that reason too. So
I can believe that. But like you say, I mean, it's interesting. I honestly do think a lot of this is down to how sympathetic the people who are complaining are, because you also mentioned open access. And again, frankly, the open access stuff is precisely someone doing exactly this. They're ripping off a thing that you have to pay for and making it available for free. But the reason I think a lot of people are
open access people would not agree with your description of open access. By the way,
once
they would say that you are publishing research content so you can access it without having to go through the antiquated research journal method.
Once you get past we're doing this for the public good and for knowledge, which they are, absolutely, the fact remains that the difference between these things, I think, is that the thing that the open access people are doing is flagrantly against the law. It's just that the law you're breaking is essentially propped up by Elsevier, and no one likes them.
I think we may be talking about two different open accesses. The open access that I'm talking about is where universities... So a good example of this is Texas A&M University. I did a little bit of... I went and spoke at their thing.
Right, so
they are putting their research studies in a public forum that people can access.
Okay, so technically what I'm talking about is Sci-Hub, right?
Okay.
Which has got everything that's published as open access, so they're not publishing it in the research journal, they're just basically putting a PDF on their website and going, we're not bothered about being in the journal, which they're perfectly allowed to do, absolutely. But I don't think anyone's got a problem with that, right? They did the research, they're entitled to do what they want with it. If they're prepared to forego the supposed benefits that come from getting in a research journal, like you get tenure, then that's entirely up to them to do it, in the same way that you are perfectly entitled to write songs and give them away free, and no one has a problem with that. Things like Sci-Hub are not that, but everyone's like, well, you know, the journal people have got the whole market locked up and charge monopoly rents, and we want to do something about that. In exactly the same way that I think people using Napster felt a little tiny bit that they were striking a blow for the common man against some massive overarching corporation. And as a free benefit, loads of free music. Hooray. But this, the Internet Archive thing doesn't feel, I think, like they're striking a blow against huge bloated corporations who've locked up the publishing market. And I don't know whether this is clever marketing and clever positioning, but it feels like they're striking a blow against the authors. And it never did feel like that with Napster. And I don't know whether that's just my...
Do you think that's a function of where you were at the time, though?
Perhaps so, absolutely, yeah. Which is why I'm kind of a little bit ambivalent about this, because you can't have a law which says it's okay to break the law as long as the people who are enforcing that law are the bad guys. Because if you explicitly cast away the only decision process we've got for deciding who the bad guys are and just let the people who are deciding do it, then it can't possibly work. I mean, that's chaos. So,
yeah, it's... I don't know. I mean, I think we all agree this is bad, Internet Archive, and you should think about what you've done and come up with... We agree with your mission, but we don't agree with your approach, and you need to come up with a better way. Again, I just think it goes back to talk to the content creators. So many content creators are overly generous with their content because it's how they get to build audiences, right? Just think about how many content creators put free content out there so they bring you into their book or their whatever.
I don't think I agree with you, precisely because the content creators don't get to decide. If the Internet Archive came to talk to you and said, could we do this with people powered?
Right.
Well, actually, no. Let's say they come and do this 4 years from now, right? So not right now, because you're currently in a very tight relationship with your publisher, right? And you're promoting the book and everything. But 4 or 5 years from now, it's not a big list seller for them anymore, like it is now, right? So the Internet Archive come talk to you and say, hey, we want to put people powered on this. And you go, yeah, that's fine with me. I've got no problem with that. And then some middle manager at your publisher will go, no, we don't do that kind of thing. You don't even get to talk to them. You don't even know what their name is or anything. You just get an email back saying, we do not enter into this kind of arrangement. End of discussion. It's a brick wall. So, and the IA's...
I mean, that could conceivably happen. Yeah. That could conceivably happen.
The IA's kind of approach has kind of been, because we're doing things, we're on the side of the right, we're prepared to flout the law. But it feels in this a little bit like they've changed it from, this is right, so we should do it, to being, we're doing this, so it must be right.
Right, which we think is stupid.
I think this is why more content creators want more control over the copyright of their works, precisely for reasons exactly as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, as well as, by and large, beyond a publisher publishing your book, for example, and beyond a record label putting your album out and getting it on stores, these companies don't do a lot for you.
No.
Publishers don't do marketing for you. Record labels don't do marketing for you. So I think content creators I can build a massive audience, and I can sell it directly to them. And because I'm nurturing them, they can convert highly. It's like this is the big problem. This is a broader topic about publishing, but this is the reason why the publishing industry is struggling, is because they don't actually market people's content. If they did, then I think there'd be a strong demand for certain publishers. The exception here are the really big list publishers like Simon & Schuster, where they do massive amounts of marketing because they're having James Comey and Hillary Clinton books out there.
Right. So, your book is either gets all of the marketing or very, very, very little of the marketing.
It also applies to some extent to things like genre publishers. So if you look at sci-fi stuff, fancy that genre, you've got places like Torn, Bain Books, and so on, who are smaller, but they have that more personal touch that your enormous media companies don't. And therefore, they are doing marketing because they're going to conventions and they're hiring people to write in-depth chapter-by-chapter weekly studies of a particular book on their website and fostering a community around that. And so on. So, and that is marketing, and that's great. But that doesn't happen everywhere. I mean, I believe it happens in romance novels, but I don't know much about the field. It certainly happens in sci-fi and fantasy, or
and I bet you anything,
speculative fiction.
I bet you anything it happens with some of those sci-fi authors and some of those romance authors.
Oh, I'm sure it does. Yeah. You've probably got to be flavour of the month for whatever reason. You are flavour of the month.
Well, it's a chicken and egg thing. If you've got a large audience, usually a publisher will do a lot for you. If you've got no audience, they'll do nothing for you. Beyond a limited amount. But I get it, because publishers, they're operating on super tight margins, right? They don't have those marketing budgets available to them. So anyway, we should wrap it up.
We should.
And we should ask our audience what they think.
I was just going to say that because I don't know that there's a topic that we have discussed in all of the time of this show that the three of us agree so closely on. So I'm curious if this is just, it was bound to happen eventually, or if our listeners also are on the same page here.
And what I think is interesting about it is that we agree on a kind of ambivalent position. Normally, at least one of us will take the extreme on one side or the extreme on the other, and occasionally, memorably, we'll take opposite ends of the same thing. But on this, we're all in fierce agreement about not being fierce about it, and the truth is somewhere in the middle of everything. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, literally, I couldn't be more on the same page, I think.
Join our Slack channel.
It is.
So join the Slack channel. We want to hear from you. I also have one funny fact. So I went to support Jonathan Little and buy a copy of Bad Voltage, figuring he probably going through some tough times. Not a bestseller, I would imagine. Bad Voltage, which I'm assuming as a result of this show becoming very popular, is $1,012.90 on Amazon. And this is true.
$1,000?
It's $1,000.
$1,012.90. Paperback.
Well,
sorry.
Did you enjoy it?
Not buying the book. So I think it may be a new business model. Write a book. When was this thing published? Quite a while ago, from 1989. So publish a book. Wait 20 years for someone to come up with a popular podcast, and sell the book for $1,000 a pop. You're welcome.
I need to get out of stockpiling hand sanitizer and start doing that book instead. The profit margin's way higher.
Also, you're going to have to check out my brand new podcast called The Bible.
I'm not sure the causation money flow works in both directions here. Also, and I haven't checked this, but I'm prepared to bet money there are Bible podcasts already.
There may be.
The church have basically nailed the idea of having one bloke talking and everyone else listening once a week for 2,000 years. They are not new to this concept.
Can I just listen, pal, just while no one's listening, when you're making a reference to the church, you might want to not use the term nailed the idea, by
the way. You make a very good point. Sorry to those of you listening around Easter, ironically enough.
All right. I think it's time.
I think
time was 15 seconds ago.
We need to tell people to study. Those of you who forced your way through that last little bit.
Yes. Good point.
So, Jeremy, why don't you give us a very brief introduction about what we're doing in the next show in order that the people listening have time to read up a little bit so they can follow the conversation?
Yeah, so we've talked about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general and blockchain quite a bit over the duration of this show. And one thing that I thought was interesting is there are now a couple countries, China kind of leading the way, but a couple other ones that are actually looking at digital true fiat currency. So this wouldn't be cryptocurrency. It would be the actual country dollars, true fiat currency released from the federal bank that happened to be digital. So I thought that would be, there's quite a bit of segue from this show to that show. So I figured it'd be an interesting topic to cover next show. So for those of you interested in economics and other related items, if you want to do a little research, and we'll chat about it in 2 weeks.
Exactly. So you can listen in and get a sense of what's going on, and that means we're also going to do some research.
We are. I had exactly what this concept is about explained to me in words of one syllable by Jeremy a week ago, and I've been reading furiously ever since.
Those words, by the way, were just idiot, repeated over and over again. All right, well, go and check out the Slack channel and join the community. We've got a really lovely community that's forming. Let us know what you think about this show. Go and do your homework for the next one, and we'll see you on the other side.